observe as something quiet has begun moving through our sky, and somehow it has brought you here at this exact moment. You were not meant to pass this night untouched. Far beyond the noise of Earth, a distant body has slipped into our awareness, not loudly, not suddenly, but with unsettling precision. Its light is fading as it comes closer, as if it has learned how to disappear while approaching. What are the odds that an interstellar object would follow a path so clean, so exact, that it looks less like a fall and more like a decision? What if its dimming is not decay, but control? Now picture a faint shape gliding inward, steady and unhurried, carrying questions older than memory. Stay with me. Tonight the universe whispers again. I remember the sound of the observatory at night. It was never truly silent, but it felt close enough. A low mechanical hum lingered in the air, the soft breath of cooling systems, the slow ticking of synchronized clocks keeping time with the sky. Screens glowed gently in the darkness, each one filled with data that usually behaved exactly as expected. Most nights passed this way, calm and predictable, with gravity drawing its quiet curves and the cosmos offering nothing more than routine. That night began no differently. 3 Atlas entered the data stream as a faint point of light, barely distinct from the countless others catalogued each evening. The automated surveys marked it, measured it, and moved on without hesitation. There was no dramatic flare, no violent outburst, no obvious signature demanding human attention. It appeared to be just another distant visitor, shaped by entropy and time, passing through our neighbourhood without consequence. But patience has a way of revealing what haste cannot. When astronomers stacked multiple nights of observations together, something subtle shifted in the picture. The background stars blurred into their expected arcs as Earth turned beneath them, yet Atlas did not follow. Its path cut cleanly across the starfield, a line so straight it felt almost uncomfortable to look at. Where most interstellar objects traced gentle curves shaped by gravity wells and distant encounters, Atlas moved as if guided by an invisible rule. The tracking software noticed before any human did. Mid-process, the system halted. The line of motion refused to fit within accepted tolerances, forcing the program to pause and flag the object for manual review. Atlas was marked in red, not as a threat, but as an anomaly, the kind that demands careful eyes and quiet rooms. Within minutes, larger telescopes were redirected mirrors turning slowly toward the coordinates, where Atlas continued its calm advance. Each new exposure confirmed the same unsettling consistency. Atlas did not jitter. It did not stagger under gravitational influence the way drifting fragments usually do. There were none of the tiny irregular steps that betray an object being tugged by unseen forces. Instead, it appeared exactly where the calculations said it would be, frame after frame, night after night. Its motion was unhurried, steady and precise, sliding along its projected track, as if the path itself mattered. The light from Atlas offered no warning. Its brightness remained smooth, almost soothing, producing a light curve that suggested stability rather than danger. There were no sudden spikes, no chaotic fluctuations, nothing to alarm those watching the graphs scroll quietly across their screens. If light alone were the judge, Atlas would have been dismissed as harmless. But geometry told a different story, and geometry rarely lies without reason. Hidden inside those calm numbers was behaviour that felt wrong in a very specific way. What unsettled the first analysts was not complexity, but simplicity. Randomness seemed absent. As cities on Earth dimmed, one neighbourhood at a time, and clouds drifted slowly across oceans, Atlas continued its motion unchanged. It traced the same quiet line across the sky, indifferent to the turning planet beneath it. By the time the Discovery Circular was prepared, Atlas had already aligned itself with a future position near Earth's orbit, holding what felt like a silent appointment. The story of that appointment was only beginning. Early reconstructions of the orbit showed something unexpected. Atlas was not plunging blindly through the solar system on a steep interstellar arc. Instead, its calculated path curved into a smooth, low, eccentricity trajectory that closely paralleled Earth's own journey around the Sun. It did not intersect aggressively, nor did it veer away. It seemed to follow at a respectful distance, as if sharing a lane rather than crossing traffic. Night after night, new data refined the picture. Each update sharpened the solution rather than complicating it. Models tested gravitational captures, distant planetary nudges, and measurement biases. Yet Atlas resisted every attempt to be made ordinary. Small discrepancies appeared in its velocity vector, tiny sideways shifts that persisted even after exhaustive recalibration. Under pure gravity, the object should have followed a slightly different curve, but the residuals remained structured and stubborn. Inside control rooms lit by soft monitors, projected points of closest approach slid gently along Earth's orbit. The distance was comfortably safe, yet unnervingly tidy. It looked less like a chance encounter, and more like a deliberately chosen passing corridor. Outside those rooms, the world continued unaware. Seasons changed, tides moved, and life carried on beneath a sky that appeared unchanged. Somewhere far above, Atlas followed its quiet curve, moving not like a fall, but like an intention. The question of who or what might hold that intention remained unspoken. When the James Webb Space Telescope was finally tasked with observing Atlas, expectations were modest. Astronomers anticipated the familiar spectral fingerprints of dust and ice, the gentle signatures of water vapor, carbon monoxide, and silicate rock. Instruments were tuned for the usual song of a comet, like body warmed by distant sunlight shedding material into space as it travelled. The spectrum that returned was anything but familiar. Instead of soft absorption bands, the data revealed broad, smooth regions where structure should have appeared interrupted by sharp features that defied existing models. It was as if the light had passed through an ordered lattice rather than a chaotic cloud. Calibration pipelines were rerun, reference stars rechecked, and dark frames scrutinized, yet the result remained unchanged. Attention slowly shifted from error to object. Laboratory libraries built from decades of heating rocks and ices failed to produce a convincing match. Some high-density alloys and exotic metallic mixtures offered partial echoes, but nothing aligned cleanly with the full spectrum. In meeting rooms, the language remained cautious, but the imagery began to change. Atlas was described less as a snowball and more as a shell, a structure with a surface that interacted with light in unfamiliar ways. Outside, the universe remained serene. Atlas continued along its poised trajectory, reflecting that strange spectrum back into the darkness. For those watching, the sense grew that this was no ordinary visitor. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, carrying with it a story, written in motion rather than words. And as the instruments continued to listen, the quiet realization settled in that discovery was no longer the question. Understanding would have to wait. It's all right to not understand. As the nights passed, attention slowly shifted from how Atlas moved to what it might be saying. Light had already unsettled expectations, but light alone never tells the whole story. Beyond the visible spectrum, the universe carries quieter channels, forms of communication that drift unnoticed unless someone is patient enough to listen. Tonight, the universe whispers again, not through brightness or motion, but through rhythm. The first hint arrived almost by accident. On long, quiet baselines, radio receivers picked up a narrow band of brightness that rose and fell with remarkable regularity. It did not roar or flare. It pulsed gently like a distant heartbeat embedded in static. Against the usual froth of cosmic noise, the signal stood out precisely because of its restraint, calm and persistent in a place where randomness usually dominates. Engineers did what they always do when something unexpected appears. They suspected interference. Satellites, ground transmitters, stray reflections, forgotten equipment all came under scrutiny. Each possibility was tested and discarded in turn. Nothing local aligned with the timing. Nothing human explained why the signal followed Atlas across the sky, with unwavering fidelity night after night as Earth slowly rotated beneath the antennas. When the data was folded across longer intervals, a pattern emerged. The signal resolved into a simple cycle, a bright phase followed by silence repeating every 53 minutes. It was not erratic. It did not drift. The cadence held steady as Atlas advanced along its path. The Deep Space Network adjusted its schedules, handing the signal from dish to dish so the pulse would not be lost to the turning planet. At first, the pulse was treated as a curiosity. Plasma interactions, magnetic wakes, and exotic natural processes were proposed and modelled. But when analysts traced the direction of arrival, the beams converged exactly on Atlas itself. As Earth's motion introduced expected frequency shifts, the signal corrected in response, remaining locked to the object's frame of reference. It was as if Atlas were quietly compensating, making itself easy to hear. Pattern analysts joined the effort, bringing both modern algorithms and older patient techniques. Inside the repeating sequence, simple structures began to surface. Prime numbers appeared, then ratios, then combinations that described distances and periods within the solar system Atlas was crossing. The signal did not point outward toward the stars. It pointed inward toward motion, toward orbits, toward timing. One cluster of ratios traced Earth's year with unsettling clarity. Another mirrored the planet's distance from the Sun, including the slight oval that defines its path. The message, if it could be called that, seemed less like a greeting and more like a map. In quiet notes passed between colleagues, some wrote that Atlas appeared to encode not just where Earth was, but how long it had been there. That implication settled heavily in late-night offices. It suggested memory, not a record stored in libraries or carved into stone, but something older, carried across interstellar distances and revealed only in fragments. For those reading the data in silence, the reaction was not panic. It was a calm unease, the feeling of being noticed rather than threatened. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, and for a moment it seemed to acknowledge us. Outside those rooms, nothing was announced. To the wider world, Atlas remained an unusual visitor on a strange orbit. Deep inside the networks, however, the pulse continued steady and unbroken. Whatever lay hidden in the uninterrupted portions of the signal would have to wait. The layers around Atlas were only beginning to reveal themselves. As more arrays joined the listening effort, the space around Atlas began to sound different. The single, narrow line widened into a faint comb-like structure, multiple frequencies brushing past one another in parallel. When engineers plotted signal strength against distance and angle, a pattern bloomed. At a specific radius around Atlas, the signal rose and fell together in every direction, outlining a hollow sheath that moved with the object. Stacked optical images added another surprise. Small dim points appeared near Atlas's path, faint enough to be overlooked individually. But when tracked across multiple nights, they held fixed positions relative to Atlas, maintaining consistent separations as the group travelled together. Natural fragments should have drifted, collided, or lagged behind. These did none of those things. The formations resolved into a loose ring, and a subtle wedge ahead of Atlas like a shallow bow, cutting through space with a trailing guard behind it. The radio sheath wrapped around the entire structure, suggesting coordination rather than coincidence. In an internal summary, one line described Atlas as a vehicle-like object, accompanied by multiple co-moving bodies. The language was careful, but the implication lingered. Another line, even shorter, noted that the approach geometry was statistically inconsistent with a random encounter. Numbers replaced adjectives, probabilities replaced speculation, yet the weight of the conclusion was unmistakable. Atlas no longer felt like a wandering stone, it felt organised, passing through rather than tumbling past. To understand what such an organised visitor might be prepared to do, attention returned to the signal itself. As more cycles were stacked together, a deeper rhythm emerged. What first sounded like a simple pulse unfolded into layered structures. The streams separated into repeating clusters, each one composed of 3 distinct elements that returned with patient precision. Machine learning models traced how each element responded to subtle changes in the environment. When plasma conditions shifted, one part of the cluster brightened while another dimmed. When Earth's motion altered the apparent frequency, the next cluster arrived slightly adjusted as if acknowledging the change. Gradually a new interpretation took shape. The triplets behaved less like a heartbeat and more like logic. On whiteboards, researchers sketched flow charts mirroring the signal's structure. Arrows connected states. Conditions led to responses. The patterns resembled decision trees rather than noise. It was not proof of intent, but it was difficult to ignore the resemblance to a program quietly running, waiting for thresholds to be crossed. For some, this realization brought an unexpected comfort. If Atlas followed rules, then it was not acting on whim. It responded. It adapted. Silence is the universe thinking, and here was silence shaped into sequence. The next question, unspoken but heavy, was how much of this could ever be shared without reshaping how humanity understood its place. Traveller. If you have ever stayed awake too late listening to static between stations, you know this feeling. The sense that meaning might be hiding just beneath the noise patient, and indifferent to whether it is ever found. Atlas did not hurry. It continued along its path, pulsing softly, letting its signal breathe into the dark. Whatever Atlas intended, it was not rushing to be understood. And for now, it was enough to listen. It's all right to not understand. As Atlas continued its steady approach, the central question began to change in a quiet, almost unnoticed way. It was no longer only about how the object moved or what it transmitted, but about how it interacted with space itself. Every body, when observed closely enough, reveals its relationship with gravity radiation and the invisible structures that hold the cosmos together. With Atlas, those signs appeared early, as if the space around it had begun to rearrange itself in anticipation. The decision to send a small probe did not arrive as a dramatic announcement or a sudden alarm. It emerged naturally from the data, the same way gravity reveals itself through motion rather than declaration. Engineers understood the limits from the beginning. The craft would not rush forward or attempt contact. It would arrive early, drift quietly, and observe. The purpose was simple and restrained to understand what kind of environment Atlas carried with it as it passed through silence. The launch passed almost unnoticed among other missions leaving Earth. At dawn, the vehicle rose through the atmosphere, shed the last pull of gravity, and unfolded itself into the vacuum. Solar panels, aligned antennas opened, and the probe began its long journey outward. Navigation teams fed it small corrections, barely perceptible nudges that guided its path toward a narrow corridor ahead of Atlas, where the two trajectories would come close without crossing. As the distance closed, the space ahead of the probe began to feel subtly wrong. Instruments that had measured empty vacuum for months now reported gradients where none should exist. These were not sharp boundaries or violent disturbances, but smooth slopes in energy and direction that all pointed back toward Atlas. The probe mapped them patiently, tracing a region that seemed to wrap around the object like an invisible contour drawn through nothing. When the probe crossed that contour, the measurements shifted again. Timing beacons slipped by microseconds and gyroscopes recorded deviations too small to trigger alarms yet too consistent to ignore. Star trackers registered distant points leaning by fractions of a pixel, as if light itself had bent without mass. The equations resisted familiar explanations, refusing to collapse into known models of magnetic bubbles or solar wind interactions. What emerged from the analysis felt deliberate rather than accidental. The data described a geometry imposed on empty space, a boundary held without physical walls. It resembled a room outlined in force, with Atlas resting calmly at its centre. Inside that region, Atlas's motion remained unchanged, its internal rhythm steady and unbroken. The probe experienced only a gentle lateral influence, not a push, but a suggestion guiding it to remain near the boundary rather than move deeper. For the team watching the telemetry unfold, Atlas shifted again in meaning. It was no longer merely a visitor or even a signal source, but something closer to an architect. A presence capable of shaping space into ordered regions, without visible structure exhaust or strain. The boundary held itself effortlessly, as if maintaining it required no more energy than remaining still. The next maneuver was cautious and deliberate. The probe edged inward using soft thruster pulses, adjusting its course by degrees, measured in patience rather than urgency. Telemetry remained smooth, and its trajectory curved gently along the invisible surface Atlas had defined. Then, without warning tones or violent spikes, a single pulse arrived from Atlas, brief and precise, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Acceleration sensors registered a firm change, not as a force applied over time, but as a sudden difference in position. One moment the probe hovered near the boundary, and the next it found itself safely outside the region Atlas had drawn. There was no shockwave, no debris cloud, no trace of motion between the two states. the mathematics showed only a clean before and after, as if the outcome had been rearranged rather than achieved through force. Engineers replayed the event repeatedly, slowing it down, isolating every parameter and checking every subsystem. Each review returned the same conclusion: a non-continuous displacement associated with the field architecture around Atlas. The language remained technical and restrained, but the imagery lingered quietly in their minds like a gentle hand moving a fragile object away from the edge of a table. The probe accepted the boundary without resistance. Its course was reset to skim the outer contour, maintaining the distance Atlas appeared to prefer. From that quieter path, instruments continued to observe how the boundary shifted and flexed as Atlas moved onward. The encounter left behind a new understanding. Atlas enforced limits, not through destruction or warning shots, but through arrangement, using space itself as a medium of communication. For anyone who has spent long nights listening to instruments hum beneath the stars, this behaviour felt strangely familiar. Nature often teaches through boundaries rather than collisions. The event horizons, tidal limits, and delicate balances between stability and collapse shape the universe more often than impact does. Atlas seemed to speak that same language, fluently reminding its observers that silence is the universe thinking, and that not all answers arrive as explanations. As Atlas approached the Sun, Earth L2 region, a place already known for its quiet gravitational balance, the precision continued. At the exact second predicted by the timestamp embedded deep within its signal, Atlas slowed, rotated and settled into position. Every adjustment refined itself by millimeters and microseconds, until the object hung in the stable suspension behind Earth's orbit, calm and unhurried. Telemetry showed Atlas unfolding into new configurations, shapes that shimmered like molten geometry, sliding past itself without fracture. Membrane-like structures spread outward, interacting with the solar wind in silence, and forming an expanse wider than the International Space Station, yet barely visible except for faint scattering. From within that structure, a narrow beam emerged, steady and controlled, directed toward a coordinate that existed only within the geometry of fields. The beam coupled directly with Earth's magnetic environment, sending gentle pulses through the planet's geodynamo. Instruments across the world recorded the response as Aurora's expanded power systems flickered softly and magnetometers drifted into new patterns. Analysis revealed sequences identical in structure to the logic seen earlier in Atlas's signal, suggesting a process of measurement, comparison and adjustment unfolding on a planetary scale. When the beam faded and the instruments settled, Earth remained unchanged to the eye, yet subtly different in the data. The operation ended without announcement or display. Atlas transmitted one final compressed sequence, a phrase encoded in constants, that resolved into a simple directive about preservation and preparation, then returned to silence. For those watching the moment carried neither triumph nor fear, only the calm realization that some encounters are not meant to be understood immediately. The solar system continued on its way, planets tracing their long ellipses and the sun burning with the same quiet intensity. Atlas remained still for a time, then prepared to move on, leaving behind a question that did not demand an answer. It was enough to accept that boundaries exist, that some are drawn with care, and that it is all right to not understand everything that passes through the dark. As Atlas continued along its path beyond the encounter, attention slowly returned to a quieter mystery, one that had been present from the beginning, but had grown easier to overlook. By all ordinary rules of observation, an object moving closer to Earth should grow brighter. Geometry alone demands it. Distance shortens, reflected light increases, and the object announces itself more clearly against the dark. Atlas did the opposite, and it did so with unsettling grace. Night after night, photometric measurements showed a steady decline. Not a sudden collapse, not a flicker or flare, but a gradual thinning of light, as though Atlas were exhaling rather than fading. Telescopes were recalibrated, sky flats rechecked, and comparison stars measured again and again. The surrounding field remained stable, while Atlas alone softened, losing more than a third of its apparent brightness as it advanced along its carefully chosen corridor. Natural explanations were considered first, as they always are. Models suggested that as Atlas shifted relative to the Sun, reflective frost might retreat, reducing surface brightness. Others proposed that material shedding could alter the way light scattered through the surrounding coma. These ideas fit parts of the data, but none aligned cleanly with the timing or the smoothness of the decline. The dimming did not behave like decay, it behaved like restraint. On plotting screens, the light curve traced a shape that felt almost intimate, a long, gentle slope downward, rather than the slight rise expected from approach. It was a calm refusal to follow perspective, a quiet divergence from rules that had held true for countless visitors before. In late-night offices, analysts stared at the graphs and imagined surfaces turning dark, orientations shifting, or structures folding inward beyond the reach of direct imaging. Nothing visible confirmed those thoughts, yet the behaviour invited them. As Atlas grew nearer and fainter at the same time, its surrounding features began to reveal new complexity. Behind the bright core, the tail refused to settle into a smooth streamer. Instead, it broke into clumps and gap sections, brightening and thinning, like torn fabric trailing behind a moving ship. Deeper image stacks revealed something stranger still, a faint sharp streak extending toward the sun rather than away from it. Under ordinary conditions, such an anti-tail should not exist. Dust and gas are pushed outward by radiation pressure not drawn sunward, yet the geometry showed the streak aligned precisely with Atlas's orbital plane. Simulation suggested that material released at carefully chosen times and angles could settle into that reversed blade, forming a feature that appeared to defy intuition while obeying timing. Brightness along the tail surged and faded in broken segments, rather than flowing continuously. The changes hinted at pulses rather than steady shedding, as if vents opened and closed on a schedule, or fractures woke briefly before falling silent again. Each release added another knot or gap to the plume, weaving a pattern that felt less like weather and more like choreography. For those watching through long hours of darkness, Atlas began to feel strangely alive. The tail shifted and breathed, rising and unravelling in slow motion. Nothing in the display suggested danger or instability. Atlas simply refused to behave like a quiet melting body drifting toward exhaustion. Its wake whispered instead of shouted, offering hints without conclusions. That whisper drew attention back to the light itself. When observers plotted Atlas's brightness over extended periods, a new order emerged within the ragged plume. Peaks and valleys returned again and again with remarkable precision, repeating on a cycle of roughly 16 hours. Independent telescopes across continents recorded the same rhythm, their measurements aligning within minutes. Despite differences in instruments and sky conditions, random jets should drift in phase, tumbling fragments should wander. Atlas did neither. Week after week, the cycle held steady like a heartbeat locked to an inner metronome. Models tested rotating cores, irregular shapes, and chaotic outgassing, but each explanation faltered when confronted with the simple fact. Almost all of Atlas's light came from its diffuse coma, not from a compact nucleus. A faint, central core could not drive such a strong and regular modulation on its own. When high-resolution imaging finally separated the core from the surrounding cloud, the scale surprised many. The nucleus of Atlas appeared tiny, only a few kilometers across, contributing less than 1% of the total brightness. The rest belonged to the expanding veil around it. If the pulse existed, it arose not from rotation, but from supply. The idea that followed was cautious but compelling. Somewhere near the surface of Atlas sources were opening and closing on schedule. Each activation released a fresh shell of material that expanded outward, thickening the coma and briefly increasing brightness before thinning again. Over time, these shells layered into a breathing halo, a slow cosmic rhythm unfolding far beyond human clocks. The concept did not prove intent. It did not demand intelligence. But it painted a picture of Atlas that felt ordered rather than accidental, regulated rather than exhausted. In the soft graphs and time-lapse sequences, Atlas no longer resembled a static relic of ice. It appeared as a small world exhaling in measured intervals, keeping time with a rhythm older than memory. As Atlas continued to dim while approaching, the paradox remained unresolved. Closer inspection brought clarity without certainty, and acceptance followed understanding at a respectful distance. The universe often reveals itself this way, offering patterns without explanations, behaviours without motives. In the quiet that followed, the dimming no longer felt like disappearance. It felt like preparation. By the time Atlas began to slip away from Earth's immediate neighbourhood, the sky itself seemed unchanged. Planets kept their patient pace, seasons continued their quiet turning, and nights arrived on schedule. Yet something subtle lingered in the awareness of those who'd watched closely. Atlas had passed without spectacle, leaving no scars, no debris, no clear answers. What remained was a question softened by calm rather than sharpened by fear, a reminder that not every visitor announces its purpose before departing into silence. It asked nothing, demanded nothing, and trusted time to carry its meaning forward without urgency alone. For scientists, the encounter settled into memory as a boundary between knowledge and humility. Data could be archived, graphs labelled, and papers drafted with careful language. Still, a quiet space remained where conclusions refused to harden. Atlas had followed rules, yet not all of them. It behaved gently as if mindful of fragile systems, and then moved on. In that restraint, many found comfort. A universe capable of subtlety feels less hostile than one driven only by force. It suggested that silence can be deliberate, and restraint itself may carry meaning across vast distances without warning, instruction, or declaration given. For those listening in the quiet hours, Atlas became something else entirely. Not an object, but an experience. A reminder that attention itself is a form of participation. Traveller. When you watch the sky long enough, patterns emerge that do not demand answers. They simply ask to be noticed. Atlas offered no revelation, only alignment. It passed near, adjusted nothing we could see, and departed, leaving curiosity softened into peace. In that stillness, fear loosens its grip and wonder becomes a companion rather than a question shared quietly beneath stars that continue their ancient work without pause or concern eternally. As Atlas receded into deeper space, the story did not close. It dissolved. Somewhere beyond reach, something ancient still moves, carrying memory through radiation, dust, and silence. Perhaps Atlas was only passing through. Perhaps it was tending quietly to systems older than us. Listener. It is all right to not understand. Silence is the universe thinking. And tonight that thought drifts on leaving Earth, turning safely beneath familiar stars. The question remains gentle, unforced, waiting patiently like sleep arriving without being summoned. It will be there tomorrow, and long after, attention fades into ordinary daylight and routine once again softly. As Atlas faded into the deeper dark, the sky returned to its familiar calm. Orbits held steady, the sun continued its quiet burning, and Earth turned without noticing the delicate passage that had brushed so close to its path. Yet something lingered in the silence, a soft awareness that the universe had spoken in a language of restraint rather than spectacle. What we witnessed did not demand belief or fear. It asked only to be held gently in thought, like a question set down rather than answered. Traveller to observe is a humble act. We watch, knowing our instruments are small, our timelines brief, and our certainty incomplete. Still, the universe responds, not always with clarity, but with patterns, pauses, and moments that remind us we are part of a much larger rhythm. Atlas left no monument behind, only a trace of wonder, and the quiet realization that even unanswered encounters can deepen our sense of belonging beneath the stars. Science moves forward by measuring what it can, yet meaning often arrives in what remains unresolved. In that space between data points, human curiosity rests patient and awake. We are small, yes, but not invisible. The act of noticing itself becomes a form of participation, a shared moment between mind and cosmos. Now the night settles again. The questions drift onward, unhurried, waiting for another observer, another orbit, another time to be considered. Rest well. Stay curious. The universe will keep watch,